Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the mind of a Victorian genius, a guy who practically conceptualized the modern computer, over a century before it actually existed. We are, of course, talking about the incredibly fascinating Charles Babbage.
So I want you to imagine a world where the very first computing revolution wasn't driven by silicon microchips or electricity, but instead it was driven by massive brass gears, thousands of mechanical cogs, and steam power. It sounds like some kind of steampunk science fiction, right? But as you'll see, it was incredibly close to being reality.
Section 1. The Victorian Computer. Let's step back into the 19th century.
Babbage was born in London in 1791, and right out of the gate, he was brilliant. By the time he arrived at Cambridge University in 1810, he was already largely self-taught in contemporary mathematics. But here's the thing, he was bitterly disappointed with the standard math instruction there. He actually found it outdated. So what does he do? In 1812, he and a few friends just go ahead and form the Analytical Society to push for better methods. Right from his youth, he had this totally unrelenting drive to optimize and standardize everything he touched. Section 2. Master of many trades.
Now you might just think of him as the computer guy, but computing was honestly just one of his staggering polymath obsessions. The man was basically a Victorian Tony Stark. He invented the train cowcatcher, the metal frame on the front of a train to clear obstacles. He invented an early ophthalmoscope for examining eyes. He helped pioneer the uniform postal rate in Britain. Oh, and in the 1850s, he secretly broke the supposedly unbreakable Vigenère cipher during the Crimean War. Literally, the man simply could not stop solving problems. And beyond physical gadgets, he made massive economic contributions. He established what we now call the Babbage Principle. In an 1832 book, he pointed out that factories could severely cut labor costs by just breaking down the work. You assign your high-skill, high-cost workers only to the specific tasks that absolutely require their expertise. Then, you leave the simpler tasks to lower-paid workers. It seems super obvious to us today, but back then, this was a totally groundbreaking concept for operational research.
This economic theory was a real game changer. It was so influential that it directly shaped the thinking of vastly different historical figures. Karl Marx, for instance, specifically built his arguments regarding factory productivity straight on Babbage's writings. John Stuart Mill was heavily influenced by him too. So Babbage's ideas were absolutely foundational to how the entire modern world began to understand industrial labor.
But look, he definitely had his quirky side quests too. Babbage was notoriously annoyed by public nuisances. He actually published a literal tally of the causes of broken plate glass windows in a factory. He fastidiously noted that exactly 14 were caused by drunken men, women, or boys, compared to 450 from other causes. He also fiercely campaigned against street musicians, especially organ grinders. He actually calculated the exact amount of his own intellectual time that he felt they destroyed with their noise.
Section 3. The Difference Engine.
Okay, so back to computing. This whole journey was essentially sparked by his intense, almost painful frustration with human error. The absolute spark moment hit him around 1812. He was looking at these mathematical tables, which, back then, were calculated entirely by hand by human computers, and they were just notoriously full of mistakes. Babbage realized, wait a minute, these error-prone human calculations could be completely replaced by a flawless, automated mechanism.
So he proposes the difference engine, and the physical scale of this thing is it's hard to fathom. It was a proposed 15-ton, 8-foot-tall mechanical beast of brass and cogs. It was supposed to be composed of 25,000 individual parts. It used a mathematical method called finite differences to automatically calculate a series of values, which cleverly avoided complex multiplication entirely. But, as you can guess, building a 19th century marvel like that was not cheap. 17,000 pounds. That's the massive fortune the British government sank into this project over more than a decade. But between incredibly elaborate machine tooling costs and endless disputes with his chief engineer, the Treasury eventually lost confidence. They just completely halted his funding.
Section 4. The Analytical Engine. Now, most people would probably give up right there. But for Babbage, the struggle of the difference engine actually led to a far greater world-changing breakthrough. There was a critical distinction to make here. He moved from the difference engine, which was, frankly, just a really amazing automated calculator, to the analytical engine. This new concept wasn't just a calculator. It was a general-purpose, fully programmable computing architecture.
Honestly, this is where your jaw should hit the floor.
His mechanical design seamlessly and flawlessly predicted modern 20th century electronic computer architecture. I'm serious, he had a store for data memory, he had a mill, which acted exactly like a modern CPU for operations, and he used punch cards, an idea he creatively borrowed from the Jacquard loom, for inputting programs.
And he didn't stop at basic memory and processing. The analytical engine was designed to support sequential control, conditional jumps, looping, and a completely separate input/output unit. These advanced features meant this giant mechanical device was, in principle, Turing complete. Actually, let that sink in. He conceptualized modern programming logic over 100 years before the first electronic computer was even built.
Section 5. Lovelace and the Legacy.
Of course, a genius of this magnitude rarely works completely alone in a vacuum. We absolutely have to introduce Ada Lovelace, the crucial collaborator who truly grasped the analytical engine's world-altering potential. She corresponded extensively with Babbage, and famously, while translating a paper on his engine, she added her own massive set of notes. In those notes, she wrote an algorithm that would enable the engine to calculate a sequence of Bernoulli numbers. Because of this phenomenal achievement, she is widely credited today as the very first computer programmer. Yet despite the sheer brilliance of Babbage and Lovelace, we're left with kind of a tragic ending. Babbage died in 1871 at the age of 79, and his grand machines remained largely unbuilt. Between the funding issues, his notoriously abrasive personality, and his severe clashes with authorities like the Astronomer Royal, he died surrounded by unfinished cogs. A lot of his contemporaries just viewed him as a brilliant but ultimately failed eccentric.
Section 6. Ultimate Vindication. But you know, history has a funny way of correcting itself. Let's fast forward to modern engineering. In 1991, the London Science Museum decided to completely construct his difference engine number 2. And they did it using his original plans and strict 19th century manufacturing tolerances. In 2000, they built his mechanical printer. And in 2011, researchers proposed Plan 28 to finally build the analytical engine. These modern engineers proved without a shadow of a doubt that his initial, completely theoretical designs were absolutely perfect. The ideas weren't flawed at all. The manufacturing capabilities of his day simply couldn't keep up.
And just to emphasize how perfect those designs really were, 31. When that 1991 machine performed its very first calculation, it successfully returned the results to 31 digits of precision. I mean, jaw-dropping accuracy, from a design drafted over a century and a half earlier. No microchips, just beautifully arranged metal.
So what is the big takeaway here? It's the sheer, unbelievable scale of his legacy. Yes, half of his physical brain literally rests in a jar in the Science Museum in London, preserved for history. But his true legacy lives on in his concepts, from the economics of the modern factory floor to cryptography, right down to the very architecture of the device you are using to watch this explainer right now. His relentless pursuit of optimization quite literally paved the way for the information age. I want to leave you with this incredibly profound quote from his 9th Bridgewater treatise. Babbage believed in what he called a library in the air, a space where every word and motion was imprinted at the atomic level in an eternal record. Think about that for a second, in the context of our modern internet and cloud computing. A man surrounded by steam, brass, and soot somehow envisioned a world defined by permanent, invisible data. So I have to ask you, when we look at today's bleeding-edge technology, whose Victorian-era blueprints are we unconsciously fulfilling next?